Yes.
Welcome everyone tonight to the Utilities Committee meeting, June 8th. We're going to get started with McCormick update.
Yeah, so this is pretty quick. I mean, at the last meeting, we talked about having released the overall bond, got a 2-year maintenance bond for the work accepted. We're now in the position of McCormick has presented different alternatives for the water hammer issue. And so we've recently selected what we call option 3, isn't it, Jackie?
Yes.
It's the one where we do want a surge tank and an air vac somewhere in the line. So at this point, that's the more expensive fix. It's about $300,000, I think, and it's going to require a surge tank in the lift station and then an air vac, and then an air vac probably up on Canyon Court, kind of as far east as we can. And so we've made that request for McCormick Communities to move ahead with that. They pushed back a little bit. They wanted us to go with the 2 air vac system, and there was the potential for problems in the future if we went with that scenario. So I think we've selected the best option, and they're moving ahead with the design of that now. They've completed their analysis.
So Mark, you said 300,000 is what it's going to cost to do that?
Yeah, I think it was a $300,000 estimate to go that route, as opposed to the other.
Are they?
It was 150,000, so it's an additional 150,000 to go with the surge tank air vac as opposed to the double air vac. But we're not.
That's supposed to take care of the water hammer. Oh, yeah.
Right, and the water intrusion, I'm not sure what they're doing there. They're going to continue to inject. But we have a new maintenance bond or a new performance bond in place for these two items, if you recall from the last meeting. So they're now moving ahead with the final design for this repair. And that's really
Great.
what we've got on that.
Okay, thank you. Splash pad update.
Splash pad, I can't remember what we talked about last meeting other than I think what we talked about last time was we pulled the advertisement because the previous designer took their ball and went home, didn't want to have their design modified during the VE process. So the engineering firm that's did the VE process is currently getting us a proposal to fill in the gaps from a design standpoint for mainly the electrical and the architectural structural, that the Land Expressions basically took their design and said, nope, we're not doing this. So we will probably have a proposal. I think it was an extra 30,000, Jackie, that sounds.
29,000, yes.
30, an extra 39,000.
No, 20.
30,000, 29, 30. We're going to have an amendment to the Murray Smith contract to get this work done, to get it designed, still get it advertised. I'm hopeful we can still get this done by 2021. But the mayor and I and Jackie have worked out a plan, and Tony, we are going to be opening the splash pad probably in July. We'll ratchet down as much we can, kind of operational hours and things of that nature. So right now the public workshop crew's out unmothballing. What's the
Opening.
reopening? It was kind of
Preparing it for use.
We're removing it from mothballing, getting it operational, and we'll get it into use this year. And then probably do the work when we shut it down at the end of the year and do that work this fall.
Mark, how can we open it if it still needs to have work done to it, huh? I'm not sure how that's
No,
working.
it didn't need work done to it for it to be operational. It needed work done to it so that we could have the water recycled.
Okay.
We're gonna just run it with non-recycled for this summer.
Cindy, that was part of the agreement with the city of Bremerton, is that we make that recyclable so that we weren't having so much water to draw from their system. And so we're gonna need to let them know that we have to turn it back on, or we're going to turn it back on before we get it recirculating, and it'll still be the draw, but we're gonna limit the amount of water we're pulling, so.
Okay, so we're paying for Bremerton Water for that,
Yes,
as usual, right? Okay.
Yeah, we've got an agreement where we're needing to use water in that zone. We weren't using enough to actually make them happy because they felt like we would have finished our projects and not expended enough water revenue, if that makes sense. Because remember, they're exchanging water for capital facilities, and they didn't want us to come back and say, oh, you need to give us money now because we didn't buy enough water. So
I remember we're trading water for a reservoir. And they're concerned we're not using enough water to pay that off in the same time amount that of the agreement.
Right.
So that means that they're gonna owe us money?
That's what they're trying to.
That's, they don't want to do that.
It wasn't the intent to ever exchange.
No, I understand, but if we can't use enough water for them to,
We can use enough water.
we will. Tony was in here last week lamenting with all the irrigation happening at McCormick right now, concerns of, August to come, September to come with water levels in the tanks, and making sure that we've got that radio system in place so that we can make sure that those tanks are staying full, because they drew down quite a bit over that last heat wave. So.
Okay.
The next item, change in use charges. Is that Noah?
that's Noah.
And then water CFC credits is Noah as well.
Okay, then I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so the purpose of this conversation is to circle back. We talked almost 3 weeks ago about water, sewer, capital facility charges and redevelopment in Port Orchard and what that looks like, and how the code has some challenges as it currently is towards redevelopment. So the intent with this presentation is to walk through the code, and we took the code and applied some real life scenarios. And again, these are all scenarios, but I think it will help illustrate some of the challenges of the code and why we would propose, if the council so decides, kind of deviate and change and adjust our policy as well as the code to be more supportive of redevelopment. So with that, I tried to organize this. It's a fairly big presentation. What I found is, as I was going through the code and all the variables of calculating these capital facility charges and how a credit could be applied or an exception could be applied, it got very complex. So you'll see this as a 21 slide show presentation. Although I do want to point out at this point that slides 3 through 7 are primarily reference. It's our current water sewer code. And so those are really for you to come back to and reference. And we've already talked about a couple of these chapters in our previous conversation. So I might circle back to them throughout this conversation. So I wanted to have them there as a resource and a reference once we get to slides 12 through 20, which is really kind of walking through the scenarios. So as I stated, this slide here just demonstrates the full water sewer code. If you want to go and review anything yourself, I identified on this table here, these tiles in green, code that I think would be impacted by any policy changes. And so this is just a good reference for staff to keep in mind, hey, if you find anything else in the other chapters, let's highlight it, keep it on the chart, because again, you can see how complex it can get. So we're up to 2, 4, 8 different chapters of our code that would need to be modified because of language and just pieces, how they all fit together. Again, I got this 1304030. This is the primary code for water capital facilities charges. I did not put sewers primary code because I felt it was redundant. I did provide the full table though, if you want to go see how the sewer language is described. Again, as a reminder, water capital facilities charges applies to new construction, changes in use, and building modifications which increase the total number of ERUs. And that's going to be important again as we walk through this presentation, hopefully. In our water chapter, we talked about this last time. This is the only section that we can identify that actually provides an exception to paying water capital facilities charges. And as we discussed before, in order to have an exception, you have to actually meet the following 4 criteria, and they all must be met in order to qualify for the exception. And I want to pause on the first one because the first one's really what's going to cause us to kind of walk through the scenarios, because the first one is a non-residential account, meaning a commercial account. So as you walk through the exception code, it does not provide for any exceptions to residential accounts. It doesn't provide for any mixed use possibilities or changing in the use. It only really focuses on what I would classify as commercial accounts and how a commercial account could receive an exception. And then we find further challenges here in number 10 here, 1304-030-10, where we actually have put in there specific time periods in which an exception could qualify. So we have a certain timeline that I think staff are going to kind of get their hands around this a little tighter to see if this is something we might completely want to repeal, if it's really doing what was originally intended. So with that, I'm going to kind of launch into the scenarios. The first 3 scenarios hopefully are going to be straightforward. So I always like to build up a presentation, start with something basic, and then slowly add a layer of complexity until you see we get to limit 5, the mixed use. That is obviously going to be the most complex of these scenarios we look at. And so we're going to start with the real basics of a commercial to commercial, a high use of consumption to low use. And then we'll kind of flip-flop it and look at a low use to high use consumption table, followed by ADU and multifamily, which I don't want to spend a whole lot of time with, but I do have one slide on it because as a staffing level, we want to talk about that and modifications to the code that need to be cleaned up. And then we'll jump into the more complex options. Okay, so before I get started, I want to put some disclaimers out there. Again, because these are scenarios. These are not actual based examples. We try to look at the code and look at brainstorm what is something that practical could come forward. So all these scenarios, I am assuming that water CFC and sewer CFC connections were paid at the time of connection. So I'm assuming that the city did actually receive money from the whoever it is at the original connection. And I'm assuming within the last 14 years, in order to kind of not talk about that chapter I talked about, number 10, which has a 15-year time limit. So I'm trying to adjust the analysis so we can focus on the heart of what I think is complicating some of the credit conversation. And then you'll see I have 2 other chapters up here, 1304-35 and 1304-040. Again, those 2 specific chapters have a water in lieu of payment with a 15-year timeline that we're going to come back to, but not as a part of this analysis. So I just want to put a disclaimer. I'm actually holding off on any of those applying to the scenarios. So I'm presuming that they don't actually exist in the code in order to carry these scenarios forward. Okay, so tee this up. I want to show very clearly what the water capital facility charge table looks like. And again, on the water capital facilities charge, we charge by per ERU, and it's a flat 11,571. Now, when we come down to non-residential or commercial, you'll see we change how we charge. We now charge by a meter size, not by ERU. And then you see our table based on meter size, and then irrigation does not affect fire flow, so we do not charge for that. So that's important to highlight now because, as again, this is what really contributes to the complexity of the analysis and the different rates as we walk through. Now, on the sewer side, we have our general facility fee, $8,525, which we've talked about. We have the sewer wastewater treatment facility fee. These two combined equal the $12,122 for a sewer CFC charge. And that is what most individuals, businesses, and homeowners would pay as a part of their sewer CFC part of connection. I only highlight that because in the code, we actually have this other provision here for McCormick Land Company, divisions 1 through 10 per ERU. And so if you are a builder in that particular division, you don't pay this sewer wastewater treatment facility fee at $3,597. Instead, you pay the $881. So you'd pay the $8,525 plus the $881. Because it's in the code, again, I'm trying to stick to the code. What does the code say? What does the numbers tell us? But for most people are going to be paying this $12,122. That's the real kind of number that applies to the sewer CFC charge. Again, so I just want to reiterate this on the capital facility charge for water residential, we charge by ERUs. On the commercial side, we charge by the meter size table. And for sewer, we charge by ERUs and ERUs. That simplifies stuff. I actually took this analysis a step further and looked at the impact of these scenarios and what it would do on our actually bi-monthly billing plan and cycles. And that's really getting to the rate side. So I don't want to talk about that tonight, but in that work, this became another interesting revelation for me, is that we actually have different metrics for how we charge. We charge by units, plus a meter size, plus consumption for residential and commercial water. And then for sewer residential units, we charge by dwelling units. Those are the words that we use in the code and the chapters. And then to change it up just a little bit, when we get to commercial sewer, we go by a category type. So it's no longer ERUs or a dwelling unit. We go by a certain category, like a large restaurant that can seat 150 people, a small restaurant that can seat 50 people. So we actually go to this different description as far as how we bill. So we're not going to analyze that in this conversation tonight, but that might be something that comes back later as a part of the rate setting work in the fall. And it was interesting as I was trying to look at the implications of changing our CFC calculations and certain variables. So we're going to jump into the first three scenarios, which I would state that these are provided for in the code. These are examples that we could carry out and gives us some direction in the code. And these are the first three: the high to low use consumption for commercial only. As I stated before, the code doesn't provide for exceptions for residential. And then we have the ADU. All right, so the first example here, high to low use consumption, commercial to commercial. In this example, I'm gonna point here at the top, hopefully you guys can see my mouse. We are looking at a large restaurant changing to an office space, okay? A 4-unit office space. So it's commercial to commercial, same category type, but large restaurant to 4-unit office space. In the beginning, and that's my original column, in the beginning, this original restaurant paid for a 2-inch water meter and paid 5 ERUs for sewer, okay? My new category refers to the office space now. Now new, we're changing. They're going to put in a 3/4 inch meter because office space doesn't need that size of meter anymore, right? Much smaller meter size. And an office takes up less sewer capacity than a restaurant would. So we're reducing the ERUs. So the net impact is a reduced meter size, a reduced ERU. And in this column here, I'm representing what a 2-inch meter would cost in today's values. And I'm saying that could be the credit. Okay, so if we scroll back up, and let's see if I can do this without making you guys dizzy. Scroll back up to the table. Oh, can't do it. Where'd it go? There we go. Back up to the table. We have the 2-inch meter here. Current charge of $61,673. So I'm gonna scroll back down. So you see here, credit $61,673 for that 2-inch meter. Okay. So the new charge is based on the 3/4 inch meter, which is $11,571. And so the net change from the credit to the new charge is $50,102. We take the same mathematical approach on the sewer side, and we calculate what the sewer credit would be. We look at the new ERRs and calculate what the new charges would be, and we net them to see what the net impact would be from a financial perspective. So overall, following the code, we can say that, well, in this scenario, we're decreasing our meter size, we're decreasing our ERUs, and there's now I lost a parenthesis here, but there's a fictional $50,000 credit, and there's a fictional $12,000 credit. So per code, there would be no charge for water or sewer CFCs in this scenario. There is no refunds also, so I want to point that out. Although it's negative, we don't refund, we just don't charge you. Okay, I want to take a minute, just make sure you guys follow that, because this is the first stepping stone as we kind of layer up. And if you're following my table and the examples, you can believe me on the math side, then this will go smoother, I think.
I think it's
Any
important to know to point out the arguments that are being made by other folks to change this want us to bring consumption into the equation.
Well, I'd hold off on that, Mayor, just
Okay.
for a minute, because that will be as we move on. It's going to
Okay.
get complex, so I don't want to mix it up yet. I want to kind of walk this through as best I can.
I'm good with you, Noah.
Okay, good. All right, so that was the high to low. Now we're going to look at the low to high use. Okay, so now we're going from an office space, low use consumption, to a large restaurant, a higher use consumption. Again, you see the meter size change from a 3/4 inch. And in this example, I'm using a 1.5 inch meter. Okay. And originally they paid on a T2 ERU, and now they're looking at a 4 ERU impact. So you see we have increased our meter size, we've increased the valuation of ERUs. Same mathematical approach, we calculate what the credit would be based on the 3/4 inch meter, the new charge based on the 1.5 inch meter to show the net financial impact. Follow that through on the sewer side, we have a $24,000 credit, $48,000 charge, net impact $24,245. So following our code, we'd say, hey, ERUs are increasing because you're going from a small office space to a large restaurant. You're consuming more water, although we're not building that into this discussion here. This is focused on the CFCs. But there will be a charge from the water CFC, and we'll charge $26,960, and the sewer will charge $24,245. I also want to point out in this scenario, we are actually recognizing credit and giving recognition for the original ERUs. Okay. So there is credit being recognized because, again, as I stated at the very beginning of this, we are assuming that at the original connection, they actually paid that. They actually paid a connection fee. So now we are recognized that they paid it. We're applying it to the equation and come up with a fee for this change.
And Noah, in both of these examples, our current code provides for the numbers that you provided here.
Correct. Yeah. These first three examples, I'm making the argument our current code would allow us to do this because we're staying with, again, the key is we're staying within commercial to commercial, right? We could walk through that table, the 4 exceptions, say, check all the boxes. Great. What does the math tell us next?
Okay.
Okay, so the next example, we're going to walk to the ADU. Now this one, again, we are still working through this at the staffing level, but I'm going to kind of walk through what we see on the code, and there are challenges, but I don't want to spend too much on ADU because that's a whole different rabbit hole we will come back to in future discussions. But in this one, we're looking at a single family residence, a 3,000 square foot home on a piece of property that would like to add an ADU. And in my example, I'm saying that adding a separate ADU is a single family dwelling unit of approximately 1,200 square feet. Now, under this example, you have originally a water ERU 1, a sewer ERU 1. We're adding a single family dwelling unit of additional ERU for water and sewer. So the units are increasing by 1, both on the water side and the sewer side. Again, you see the recognition for the credit and the new charge, which results in the following net impact on the table. And again, in this example, we would say ERUs have increased. The CFC revenue is $11,571 for the additional units and $12,122 for the additional increase in ERUs. Again, I want to point out that credit has been recognized.
Noah, what happens if they can't prove that they've ever paid those in the beginning?
Another great question I want to hold to the end, because that's where the policy is going to take us, right? Yeah, I'm trying to lay this up as simple as I can right now until we get through the mixed use, and then I'm going to open this up to really ask you guys and the full council tonight some policy considerations to what you think makes sense. Okay, so now we're going to look at scenarios that I would say are unclear, silent, or just not provided for in the code. And the first one, again, I like to build this up. We're going to look at changing in use. So far, we haven't changed the use. This time, we're going to go from a residential facility to a commercial facility. Okay, that's a straight change of use. And in the first example, we're going to look at from a house to an office. And in a second example, I'm going to look at a house to a restaurant. I did analysis on these other two. We just kind of flipped it. And for the most part, the relationship's the same. The financial impact is just flipped. So I didn't do those two because I got enough information out of these first two to talk about. After we get through the change of use, we're going to look at mixing the use. So the change of use is going 1 for 1, right? Residential to commercial. Mixed use is now going to go from 1 to 2, right? Residential to commercial, residential, or commercial to residential, commercial, or some mix of the 3 variables. Okay, so it looks like everybody's following why I had to set this up this way. Good. All right, so first one. Again, I would say that these are not provided for in the code, but these are the scenarios that we are looking at and talking about. So we're looking at a single family residence of 3,000 square feet, changing its use to a 1-unit office space. Okay, and you see here my table became a little slightly more complex with the addition of the multiple factors now. So in the beginning, originally there was a water residential, 1 ERU, and there was a sewer residential, 1 ERU. There was no commercial, no commercial. Now, the new column, there will be no residential. There will be a 3/4 inch meter because it's an office space. And there will be 1 ERU for that. So what we see the impact is we decrease 1 ERU on the water residential side. We increase meter size on the water commercial size, decrease 1 ERU on residential, and increase on the commercial. Coming forward to our credit column, you'll see the credit would apply to this 1 ERU here. There's no credit for commercial because it wasn't there. The credit for the ERU is represented here. Now the new charges. We're not charging for the new residential because it's not there anymore, right? We're an office now. However, there is a charge for the office now. No charge for sewer for residential, but there is charge for commercial office now. Far column to the right, again, you see the net impact. You have a credit, a charge, a credit, a charge. Now, here's what's really interesting and important about the code right now is that it does not allow for blending of residential, commercial, and credit or fees, right? There is no provision to allow us to take the residential credits and apply them towards a commercial charge. And you can look through the code for yourself. And so what that means to me is that, well, then I would have to charge $11,571, and I'd have to charge $12,122. No refunds or credits are available. So I'll pause there. I think you guys will follow me through this. So again, this is a scenario. One thing we've been talking about is what is an alternative to this then? Would the council be open to considering a net ERU impact to a piece of property or to the city?
No, let me ask you, if our code currently doesn't allow for a credit, does it require us to charge the additional change?
For the sake of this argument, I would say yes, it does. I'd have to go back through and comb through again to verify that. I feel like it would require us to charge it, yeah. Because you are increasing the ERU from
Changing, you're not increasing.
Yes, that's true. And I'm not going to disagree with all the holes you're going to poke in the current code, because that's why we're here, right? Because I'm just trying to lay out what the code says and say, yeah, it doesn't, it's unclear, it's silent, or it's not provided for in the code.
Okay.
And so that's where, as staff, we kind of want to propose some ideas that with the council considering this net ERU impact, in which we wouldn't differentiate between residential and commercial. I'll come back to that concept in a second here. Or would they consider allow for residential and commercial to be combined? And if we did combine them, then you would see the fee impact here, right? You would net these two, they become 0, net these two 0, if you could cross your credits and your charges. The first one, considering net ERU impact to the city, was an interesting concept proposed by Public Works. Is why do we care if they're commercial or residential at all? Why don't we focus on one single thing like an ERU? Because that talks about water usage and displacement of water. So why are we getting so caught up in whether it's commercial ERU or water or residential ERU? And as you can see up here, this is where it really gets complicated when you look at residential's calculated on an ERU, but commercial's not. It's calculated on meter size. So again, we're mixing. So we're trying to think of things that might make it easier to execute, explain, and make sense. So I'm gonna keep walking through here. Keep your questions rammed down as you go, because at the end, I think the whole policy conversation is gonna bring it all together. So that was going from a single family residence to an office unit, one office unit. Now we're gonna go to a small restaurant, okay? So the top scenario doesn't change for the single family residence, still 1 ERU, still decreases, still has that net credit available. The commercial changes though now. Now it's a restaurant. So now it's a 2-inch meter, larger meter, a bigger cost, okay? Sewer doesn't change for the residential, but now sewer is larger because the restaurant, 3 RUs, calculated all the way out. And so again, this is just showcasing the impact financially that I would charge $61,000 per the code, because there's no blending of the credits and fees, and we charge 36. And if we allowed for this combination effect as a piece of property and its impact to the city, the fee would be roughly 50,000 here and roughly 24,000 under this example. So the next example, again, staying with the change in use. We're moving from a large box store, a Walmart, something like that. It was the concept, to an apartment complex, a 20-unit apartment complex. So originally they had a 2-inch meter. Again, I'm walking this all the way across, you'll see that there would be a potential credit for the commercial side. Again, and the difference here is now we're going from commercial to residential. So we're kind of flipping and flopping here. Now we're going to have, there was no residential, but now we're going to have 20 apartment complexes in this space. So we've increased our ERUs by 20. You can see the new charge, the 231,000. The impact to the sewer decreased, the potential credit, and then the charge for the sewer here of the 242,000. So again, no blend of credits. You see the fee for water revenue would be 231,000, and the sewer would be 242. If we were able to combine them, mix them, use them interchangeably, we would have a fee of 169 and a fee of 218. And I think that's the last one of my change in use. So I think you guys are following the concept. We're changing the use from a commercial to residential. Now we're gonna move towards mixing up the use. Okay, so let me focus on one fictional scenario here, and this is a scenario. Again, the key assumption is that at time of connection, all these CFCs were paid. So on the commercial side, 2-inch meter. So we're going from a large restaurant to an espresso bar. Again, that's a category in our sewer CFC code. So I'm trying to showcase some of the different elements of our sewer code. We actually have an espresso bar as a category. And then we have a 480 unit apartments. So originally the restaurant had a 2-inch meter and paid for 4 ERUs. That's the original life of that restaurant. The new building is going to look like 3/4-inch meter for the espresso bar, 40 apartment units, 1 ERU for that sewer for the espresso bar, and then 40 ERUs for the apartment complex. Just trying to keep a real straight line here. You see the net impact in the column, and then if we carry that forward, the potential credits from the original facility, 61,000 for water, 48,000 for sewer. And now we have our new column of charges, 11,000, 462,000, 12,000, 484,000, bringing us to our net column. And again, because I'm carrying this through the current portion code, no blending, we would actually charge them 462,000 and 484,000. Where now if we could blend it, you'd see the fee would be 412 and 448. So there is significant impacts and differences here. So far I've walked through very straightforward examples, and we're making some key assumptions here. A being that all at the original connection, all the CFCs have been paid, because that simplifies the analysis, right?
So Noah, stop right there. But we only started charging CFCs 15 years ago. So how do we treat somebody that didn't pay a CFC, but
so that's
we had a different animal back then?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And we dug into it because I believe Councilmember Clausen asked me that question about 2 meetings ago. So I had staff pull the resolutions, and we actually have been charging CFCs on the water side since 1940.
Okay.
Now they were different rates, and I can pull up a table to show you if that's of interest. I thought it was
1940 living. So, okay.
Yeah. So that's where it gets complicated.
Well, can we just assume whether at some point, a CFC is a CFC, and at that point in time, it was relative to that.
So let's take this one step at a time. Let me walk
Okay.
through the policy questions, because the policy discussion is going to inform the next layer of work that we need to do, which is what you've hit on and Cindy has hit on and John has hit on, but that's the next body of work. And I can only get to that body of work if you answer these questions. You and the full council, because we've got to bring this to the full council tonight for discussion as well, or a presentation if you guys support where we're going. So the first policy question we really need answered is, does the city want to consider this net ERU impact approach to the city, or are we comfortable with what we have right now? That is strictly a policy consideration. I teed up how it's approached and then alternative approaches if you want to go this route. So I guess that would be the first policy question that we need to discuss with the utility committee to see where they'd like to support this direction, because this is a big question.
Are you asking it right now?
I'm asking it right now. What are your feelings on this question? Yeah. And I'll ask again tonight, but knowing where 3 of the council members land after kind of walking through the demonstration of how these would be applied under each scenario, with the understanding of all the discussions we've had about redevelopment and desires for Port Orchard, I think you guys can have the discussion at least.
Well, I'll jump in, I guess, since everybody's just sitting there not saying anything.
I had my
I'm trying
hand.
not to, but because I don't have a vote.
Yeah, well, you still have an interest.
Yeah.
You know, I think generally speaking, there's a lot of nuances to this question. You know, what if, but generally speaking, I think the concept of a net impact seems reasonable and fair to me.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Jay.
no, I was going to say, I agree with John on that. You know, we don't want to penalize people as businesses or residential changes. However, I think there's some other questions to be asked. One of my questions that I'd like to know is, okay, we're looking at what I consider specific examples. How often does this happen in the city right now? You know, is
A
this
lot lately.
okay? So I mean, I know about tweetings, for lack of better words, but I was wondering about other examples. I had a question, and I don't know whether it's relevant or not. The idea of putting in an ADU, is, if they're tying into the existing sewer line and stuff, does that make, is that considered a separate unit?
We've had those very discussions.
Yeah. Okay.
Public Works would argue that if you're not putting a new meter in, and you could have more bedrooms in your house,
More bathroom,
or have them in the shack out back. If no, but the code says yes. But I would argue that it just depends. If you want a separate meter, some landlords might. If a separate meter and a separate service, then you should probably pay twice.
And again, when you talk ADU, to me, you just asked a magic question right there. Are you doing a separate meter, or are you, are you doing with the existing? So I think these are all good questions. I like the area of fairness. I wish I knew what the impact would be on overall budget, from these ends, because that makes a consideration too.
Well, and I guess the question also comes up when you talk about meter, you're talking about the water side. But Jay, you raise the issue of the wastewater side, and are you going to have a separate connection into the main, or can you bring the ADU into the same plumbing that connects into the main? Therefore, you need to charge another ERU, so to speak. And I know ERUs are based on flow and not connections when it comes to the sewers.
I would also point out on ERUs, I think our code is more, it's not totally clear on ERUs. And I think Noah and I have gone back and forth a little bit about how it reads, but it does need to be clarified to make it clear. But you're not just talking about accessory dwelling units. You've also got home businesses. You've got other accessory uses that can occur within your home. And so we're singling out ADUs as saying this is an additional dwelling unit, but we're not, if somebody's brewing beer in their garage or doing some other use that or working from home or having a daycare, they're not being charged a connection fee for having an accessory use in their home. So it's, I think the question of accessory uses versus a primary use of a residence is more nuanced than just the accessory dwelling unit discussion.
Yeah, and I think this is a great discussion. This is why I said I don't want to get hung up on the ADU element, because there's so many different pieces of this that still we're trying to flesh out. So I had it as a representation so we could talk about it. And that's why I was very specific in my example, say, hey, we're talking about a 3,000 square foot home, adding a 1,200 square foot home, same property, ADU. That's the example we're looking at talking about. And under that condition, this is how we treat it. We treat it just like we would a duplex, which would be if you had a 1,200 square foot on one side, 1,200 this side, you would treat it that same way.
Well, let me ask you kind of a nuance at a higher level. From a growth management perspective and a land use perspective, do we want to encourage, and I appreciate we're focusing in on one type of change, but do we want to encourage ADUs? If you do, then you'd approach it a little differently than you would if, oh, well, it's another, you're converting a single family to form a duplex.
And you could use that same argument to redevelopment.
Right.
It's more challenging to do commercial redevelopment. And do we want to provide a more meaningful credit than what our code outlines right now to move this along? I mean, we're getting plenty of greenfield development where we're still lagging, and whether projects pencil or not is in these redevelopment activities.
Noah, a clarification. So in all your scenarios on the water side, you were just looking at the water capital facility charges and the meter cost. You haven't even discussed the front footage fee in lieu of assessment, which is actually a much larger issue number wise, but it also goes back to if they didn't put the water main on that front of their property, are they going to be waived from that, or do they have to pay that? So I just want to confirm that front footage hasn't been in this conversation, but it's hanging out there.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mark. There's several things. Again, when I put up the disclaimers, I want to make sure it's clear of what I was excluding from the analysis, so we could just have this kind of basic level conversation. Although this basic level conversation is very complex. And even since you brought up that, I didn't bring in the monthly billing impact either, even though I did look at it and went, oh my gosh, okay, this really changes everything here, especially with how we would view it. But again, trying to build up the blocks, hoping to get some policy direction, high level. Again, these are high level, like John said, yeah, he could support that, but it's going to have more questions. Absolutely. This isn't an end all be all. It's just kind of, is there a general support for us to take this approach? Because we do have questions under each category. Well, how would we handle this? How would we handle that? How do we make it fair and equitable and make sense? But we don't want to go too far down that path until we say.
Yeah, as I could tell at this point, it would be more fair and equitable if we were to go ahead and do this approach versus what our current code provides for, which to me it's confusing, but it's not as fair, if you will.
Another nuance here too, that is going to muddy the water even farther. We were being asked to consider some code, an example of code, I believe was from Vancouver, that we would take into consider historic water usage to the equation too. And all we're talking about here too is credits. And I'm not advocating for or against, it's just that was an example of another community and how they're addressing it for redevelopment. And that was the Lighthouse project. And I thought it was Vancouver, but I could have.
Yes, it was, but we looked into it a little bit more, and I don't think it was as clear cut as it was represented. The code was a little bit bigger once you dug into Vancouver's code. Although certain excerpts were extracted out to look at a point. So I don't know if Vancouver's the right model, or if maybe we look to our neighbors in Kitsap County, Paulsville, Gig Harbor, Bremerton. What do they do in this venue. But I'm gonna move on to the next question because the third question is kind of what the mayor is hitting on here. So the next question is, does the city want to consider uniform variables? So you saw as I went through the chart, we were jumping from an ERU as a variable to a meter size to whether it was commercial or residential. And then the last one was whether it was units or a dwelling unit or a single family dwelling unit. So as you kind of bump around the code, you bump into different things and how it's charged and how it's described and how each department actually thinks about it as well. Because we all have a different mindset on what that means. So
Well,
if,
in my mind, it would be fairly easy to be consistent with the water side of the house. But when you get into the wastewater, that's where, you know, a restaurant is going to generate more impact to the wastewater facility than, you know, I don't know,
An accounting office.
an accounting office, yeah, or the attorney's office or whatever.
Two different animals.
correct. And then on the capital facility, so where that really shows up is the categories really show up in the billing side, on the monthly billing side, because we'll bill as flat amount for a large restaurant. Well, when we're charging the CFCs, we're actually figuring out what the ERUs are. So let me flip back here if I can do it again without making anybody sick to the top here. When you look at, we charge sewer, residential, or commercial by ERUs. So yes, we would evaluate a large restaurant and someone with public works would say, this restaurant equals so many ERUs, right? They're going to take a standard approach, logical methodology to establishing what the ERU value is, but then we charge it based on ERUs. So it's really the sewer side is pretty straightforward. It's based on ERU. Once someone determines how many ERUs this facility is using, it's the water side that flips between ERUs and meter size. And again, there's an American Water Works Association meter equivalency factors, which translate a 3/4 inch meter into roughly an ERU. But the way we've developed it in our table is to go by meter size.
So I guess I get a little confused with the meter side is more indicative of your capital facilities charge than the water usage is more on the rate side.
Mhm.
I guess I'd be looking for a recommendation from staff.
Well, and I got one more question on this page while you're here, Noah.
Okay.
And then I've got to bug out because we're gonna
Okay.
try new technology tonight. We gotta make sure it works. So the $800 charge versus the $3,500 charge, what are divisions 1 through 10? Can anybody answer that? Nick?
Nick might be able to answer that.
Actually, I've always wondered that myself, and I think it has to do with the step conversions, but I've never really been involved in those discussions.
Is it a contractual agreement? Or
Yes.
could we clean this up and
I
make it one charge?
I
throughout the
believe
city?
I believe it was a part of our purchasing the water system from McCormick of the original agreement. And there's very few in this tract anymore. So Rebecca's tracking that. We talked this over. She says these don't come up very often at all. And they've been
Okay.
infill a lot. So we could talk about it, but it's in the code. It's in the table. I just want to explain what
if
it
it's in
is.
a contract, we probably can't change that. But
Not until it's
and if it's
billed.
just the infill lots in the first division, there's not many lots left.
We're down to 8 lots, I think, is.
Okay, so it's not even worth talking about.
No,
Okay.
I think I only bring it up because again, if I tell you guys to go look at the code, you go look at the code, you go, well, what's this $800 for? And so I just acknowledge it, say it's there, although it doesn't apply to most people. It only applies to 8 more lots. Once they're done, then we can remove it from the code.
Okay. All right.
So,
I'll see you guys on Zoom. Another Zoom later.
Okay. So if you're looking for a recommendation from staff, I wish Jackie was still on. Oh, Jackie, you are there. I don't know. Jackie, do you have any thoughts on this? Because I thought when you brought that up yesterday, I thought that made a lot of sense, at least going to ERUs versus meter size. We just have to do some front end work to convert the meter sizes to the ERUs to get to the tables we need.
Exactly. It's been my experience over many, many years that ERUs are the preferred method because it's more fair. It's fair to everybody based on how much water they're actually going to be using. And we can estimate it to start with and then go back and adjust once we have some historical information on that particular use.
But what do you mean by adjust? Oh, I'm sorry, we need to charge you more capital facilities.
No, I'm talking about what we set the bill up to be, how many ERUs.
But
But we're gonna base a capital facility charge on ERUs, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely. And that comes from the architect or engineer designing the facility, tells us how many ERUs it's going to be equivalent to based on what the size of the meter. They have to figure out what the ERUs in order to tell us what size meter that.
No,
particular
I understand that part, Jackie. My question is that once they give us a number and we establish the CFC charge,
Mhm.
and then we've got some history with that development, and we find out, oops, you underestimated. So come give me some more CFC dollars to equal the actual ERU usage.
or
That would be a bit challenging.
do we give money back? You know,
Ah,
Or they get money back, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't know how we would do that. So that's a
don't
good
either.
question.
Yeah.
And again, I want to point out that these are high level policy and
Yeah.
we have our own questions below this. So I'm just trying to get, are we in the right
Yeah.
ballpark? Are you guys?
I
open
think
to-
the chances of that happening is probably minuscule compared to the total scheme. So I'm not going to lose any sleep about an adjustment later. We'll have enough experience to know whether what they're proposing is close to reality or not. So
Right, I would agree with that. And I think it's with the most important things that I see in number two, or question number two there, is to make sure that we stop differentiating between commercial and residential. That's one thing. And that we pick a variable, whatever it is, if it's ERUs, if it's units, if it's meter size, and we base the sewer off that, but it needs to be one thing rather than trying to deal with the code with two separate things, named in it is extremely difficult.
I personally like just making it consistent and go with the ERUs.
I
If we-
would support that.
if we can,
If we
there's
can,
still
if we
there's
can,
still
yeah.
some catches here.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a fair statement to make with all these. If it feels good, it looks good, you think it's bring some equity and simplicity. And once staff work it through over the next week, because we have tons of questions with each other, how would this actually work?
Yeah.
We have to bring back a proposal that works, right?
Yeah.
And that you will buy in. I'm just trying to get direction. Is this the right direction you want us to go? Because if it isn't, then I don't even want to spend my time working on that. We'll go the right direction you want us to go. And then the last question was, how do we, and this is what the mayor kind of asked is, how do we establish or value the historical / existing connection? So again, originally, that is the big one. So again, we don't have to have a definitive answer, just kind of ideas we were talking through. Because again, in all the scenarios, I made the assumption, first of all, connections were all paid at the time, and we can verify that. So do we want to look at what was paid for at the time of connection? And if so, we can go to the documents and pull up, look, they paid a 3/4 inch meter. So that equates to today's value. We would use today's value, apply it to that meter size, just like I did in examples. I don't think we'd go back and pull the historical CFC of $150, whatever they paid. I think we'd say the meter size is a meter size. An ERU then is an ERU now. We're not going to adjust for the inflation, but we'll just apply that value. Or do you want to look at what is currently being in use in that facility?
Well, you say you can look back and figure out what it was, at least for a reasonable amount of time?
Well-
Some of the time we can. Some of the time. Sometimes we don't have those records from really, really old connections. But sometimes we do have them. And I would advocate for when we do have a record, that is a record. I mean, I don't see how we can equitably ignore that. If somebody has paid for a connection, then that's an asset that they own. I think the bottom line of what we want to get to in this code is to make sure that everybody is paying the amount of money that they need to reimburse the system for the part of the system that they're using up by using that connection. And if that means it's 2 ERUs, then they should pay for 2. If it means that it's 1, then they should only pay for 1. But once they've paid that, they have that as an asset. That's theirs, they bought it.
I don't know that this is a big issue or not, but the thing that kind of jumped out at me when Jay was talking about, you know, the McCormick, the original McCormick area. How do you deal with properties that when they bought into the system, they weren't even part of the city?
Right.
But
Mhm.
is that a big enough number that we should even worry about it?
Mm.
There were a fair number of residents in McCormick, as an example, that were already connected when we bought the system. And I don't believe, in fact, I'm almost positive, I don't remember getting any kind of a windfall from the purchase of that water system from McCormick.
No, but I would think when we bought the system, we bought it as is, lock, stock and barrels, assets as well as encumbrances. And so to the homeowner, they have the asset of a water connection and a sewer connection. And to us, we have that much of our system used up.
So we would assume that those properties, if they want to redevelop, have a credit available to them
Of 1
just
year.
based,
Yes,
based on the fact that they are part of the system that we bought.
correct. That's what that would be the way I would interpret it.
You know, again, it's probably, I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. It's probably not really going to be that big of a deal. A few ADUs, maybe. I doubt if any of those homes in the original McCormick are going to change to a restaurant anytime soon. So.
Yeah, it might not be the McCormick home change into a restaurant, but it might be somebody who has what they think is a duplex now. And maybe the city has no record of there ever being a duplex there. And all of a sudden they want to change into an ADU. And we're saying, well, shoot, we don't have a record of you being a duplex. So yeah, you definitely got to pay.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of going back to, okay, what do we want to use? What was paid for at the time of connection? What was actually paid for? What records we can pull and see?
Yeah.
Or do we just want to make the assumption, hey, here's a house. We know the house has water. We know it has a 3/4 inch meter. And so it's a 3/4 inch meter and 1 ERU. It's 1 ERU and 1 ERU credit for that house. We're not going to go back digging through the file base to find it, because I think in some cases we'll find it was there, it was paid. I think in other cases we'll find that it wasn't paid. And if it wasn't paid, that was kind of the mayor's question. Well, what if it wasn't paid? Or maybe Cindy's question. What if we have no documentation that they never paid? And we've had CFCs in place since 1940. And again, we weren't here when all this occurred. How do you want to handle it? What makes sense?
But for simplicity, why not just go with current use? What's the drawback?
Current recorded use, because I think Noah's example of, we have it listed on our books as a single family resident, and they have it in their mind it's a duplex. So if our records say it's a single family, I'm sorry, we'll give you a credit for single family.
Yeah,
Right.
and therefore,
Right.
I'm sorry. Therefore, if they are in actuality using up 2 of our available connections and they've only paid for 1, then yeah, they need to pony up for the second one.
Yeah.
So are we looking at a hybrid that if we have the information, then that's what we go with? And then if not, if we don't have the information, we look at current use? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think
would go with current use. Otherwise, it's going to get pretty complex. And
That's what I was saying. Go with current
a
use.
connection in 1940 is a lot different than a connection in 2020. So
I think it's important to kind of put some side rails on this conversation. I mean, the ADU and the McCormick conversations are okay, but what we're really, I think, the concern more is the downtown redevelopment, where you've got, historic buildings that are going to be changing in use, from different, offices to, mixed use. And that's going to have the biggest impact, potentially, with this conversation, the decisions that you make, as far as, having a deficit to the potential utility.
but we haven't even gotten into the issue of capital facility charge based on usage versus, I mean, the lighthouse discussion is a whole different animal in my mind than simply it signed up as a large restaurant, you get that kind of credit.
Right, but again, if they didn't pay any CFCs, so that means they didn't contribute to the main that was installed that they've been using. So it's problematic, and that's where you get to that fee in lieu of assessment conversation on top of, do you get a credit for something that you didn't pay for originally or you didn't install?
Yeah, they haven't, according to our records, they have not participated in the sewer main, nor in the lift stations, nor in the treatment plant, none of it.
No, they've just been using the water and they want credit. They want a credit simply based on the amount of water they've consumed, where other developers are having to either install the infrastructure and then they pay rates. So unfortunately, it's very problematic when you're talking about the downtown, because even at McCormick, you can say, well, the developer paid to put the main in, right? And you bought a lot that the developer, so you don't have that fee in lieu of assessment. But in these areas of the older downtown where nobody knows when the mains got in, who put them in, you just know that the particular adjacent property owner didn't. So that's when we charge the fee in lieu of assessment. And to me, that's the bigger, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars added on top. And those are the numbers that are kind of driving development away, which gets, again, it gets into the bigger conversation of what really are we going to do with redevelopment when we know that somebody didn't pay to put the main in, they haven't contributed, and they're just basically, they're trying to base an argument on consumption only.
Or did they get credit from the previous use of that property? They've already gotten credit once.
Right.
Yeah, property that changes multiple times.
Yeah, because
so-
the
so- so-
lighthouse
Right.
didn't start out as a lighthouse, but it was connected up to the utilities.
Yeah, it was Binger's gas station and then the lighthouse and then Cheers. And now we've got a completely different use.
Right.
Right.
But my
So-
point is that when they built the lighthouse, did they assume that they had already paid based on Binger's already being connected?
Yes.
Well, there was a misunderstanding of whether they thought they had paid, but when we researched it, they never had.
So I
So
appreciate that, but did
So-
they not pay because they were already connected? They just changed the use. Who
probably.
knows what happened back then? I don't know, but I just raised the issue.
But again, when you start looking at the downtown development, whether it's the market or the Myries or the old El Sombrero, and we've got to try to get something that's workable.
Tell you what, if we could get those properties to redevelopment, I'm all for it. Personally.
So we don't have to.
I was gonna say, we're going around and around here.
Honestly, and this has been the struggle, because this is what we do. We go round and round, and then we find this example and walk through. Well, that doesn't make any sense. So I guess we're going to talk about this tonight again. I'm going to try to do this presentation for the full council. Hopefully, have a little bit of discussion. Hopefully, full council. I'm hopefully going to lean on you guys to support either this direction or not. And again, every one of these policy statements and questions has multiple layers of questions that we still have to answer as staff to bring you back something that actually works, makes sense, and is legal. I think these were the right questions to hit on and get you guys thinking about that, because you guys are hitting on all the right questions. And at this point, I just don't have the right thing to put in front of you and say, here's exactly how it could work and should work. And I want to work with my colleagues to do that.
I, for one, appreciate you doing this, Noah, because it really provides the information. It helps us follow through with this. At least for me, it did. And I personally am fine with let's do some more work on this and see if you guys can put the side rails around it, as Mark suggests. We're not going to be able to, at this level, come up with all of the answers, but if you guys could spend some time, and if nothing else, at least identify the issues that you can't come up with a guidance for, then that's where we get the big bucks to say yay or nay on it. So
No, is this your presentation? Is this you really didn't get into water CFC credits, right? This is more the change.
Yeah. This is
more
not,
change related, and keep
Yeah.
it focused and simple. Otherwise, we're going to go down too many rabbit holes.
correct.
Right. I think for the sake of the agenda, I think I'm going to scratch the last two items, the water CFC credit and the sewer rates, because again, this was really changed. We weren't getting into, hey, we want to start introducing credits, right?
No, not this, not the specific credit that we've talked about before of the
Right.
water
I think
credit. That's a different part of the code. So
That's
trying
what
to-
the agenda kind of alludes to, that we were also going to talk about credits like we did with sewer. I think that's too soon. So,
yeah, this is designed about kind of the concept of redevelopment, exceptions to paying capital facilities charges. Unfortunately, from an accounting dialogue, to apply that is a credit. That's the language we would use to apply against a fee. So then it kind of spirals into that rather than a waiver. Maybe I could use waiver as the term. So we'd have to continue to kind of massage the language. And then
just
we will
wanted
come back
to-
to the water credit
I
conversation
just want to
later.
make sure that we weren't going to actually be talking specifically about credits. It's on its own merit. We're talking about credits or waivers in relation to this conversation about changes in use.
Yeah, this topic is not about the water CFC credit code number 5. We have code. We know it's not, does not incentivize development. That's why we changed and adjusted the sewer side already. We were going to come back to that on the water side, and Nick and I got to work on that over the next month. But this came up faster, sooner, as we ran into multiple permitting questions. And as we tried to bring it forward, then certain customers reached out to the full council, said, "Hey, this is not fair. Look at your code." We are following up, looking at the code, discussing with council. So yeah.
Okay, I'm going to reflect then in the minutes that we really had 3 topics for tonight.
Okay, that's great. And that's all I had. So I thought it was a good discussion. Hopefully you 3 are more knowledgeable for tonight and can kind of help guide and answer some of the questions that are going to come up, because it is fairly complicated.
It's a definite maybe, Noah. Good work.
It's the whole idea of simplifying and making everything clearer and easier is appealing, as long as we don't miss something in the process and challenge the utilities. I feel very possessive of the whole utility structure and making sure that it can continue without impacting the current customers. And I don't know, I feel a little nervous about this transition, but
At least we're moving forward, and that's positive.
right.
We can't just ignore it. We're going to have to deal with it because it's an issue. So I agree with you, Cindy. Hopefully we can capture all those nuances, but we're not. There's going to be exceptions to every rule, but
Right.
if we can feel like we're getting the majority of the issues covered, then I think we're heading in the right direction.
Right.
And this may reopen that whole conversation about, charging sewers on, wet weather consumption. Like a lot of yours, that might be a rabbit hole we go down, because that might be the solution, is that we're just going to completely change our structure. That we're not going to be basing it on, these tables that are kind of arbitrary. We're just going to go like some jurisdictions, it's based on consumption. You take
Opens up a whole nother can of worms too.
I was going to say, we only got 20 minutes to do that.
Yeah.
I'm just,
Add some more meters.
Well, I remember when we were figuring out how to pay for the original secondary wastewater facility, and I was participating in some discussions in Bremerton. Bremerton charges based on water usage. And there were so many folks like dry cleaners that say, well, wait a minute, most of the water that comes into my facility goes out in steam. So I'm not putting it into you get into all those little nuances, and everybody is going to have a reason why it's not fair. So.
Yep.
no, I know. I know it's, since I've been here, it's already come up twice that we look at that. And so it may come up again. So.
Well, I'm sure it will. It's come up since I got there at 83. So.
Okay. So
All
it's
right.
6:11. Are we going to call it?
Yes, we are going to adjourn. See you in a few minutes, everybody.
All right.
Mark,